Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Cucaruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Welcome to Connecting with Conservation. I'm John Gassett with the Wildlife Management Institute.
Hey, and I'm Jim Cucaruto, Outdoor Stewards Conservation Foundation. Thanks for listening in.
And I'm Chris Willard with PayIt Outdoors.
Chris, glad to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about PayIt Outdoors. What do y'all do, and how's it tied into conservation?
Yeah, so PayIt is a government technology company that was founded by a couple of gentlemen out of Kansas City, Missouri, out of a trip to the DMV office, and we all know how that can be. So sitting in line, pulling the ticket, and took him forever to renew his license, and he thought, man, there's got to be an easier way. And so he started a company that was designed to remove friction out of doing business with your government. And so they work traditionally in the local space. Think things like paying your parking citations, paying your utility bills, and then also with state DMVs, license renewals, registration renewals, that kind of stuff. They wanted to expand out into the hunt fish space, and so just over a year ago, they acquired Sovereign Sportsman Solutions S3, and it was a definite growth play for them. In this industry, there's been a lot of scar tissue related to acquisitions in the space, and we've seen a few of them in the licensing space. And typically what you see is a licensing company being acquired by a bigger investment portfolio, and the service to their clients typically goes down, resources available goes down. With PayIt, that has been the exact opposite of what our experience has been. It's a definite growth play. They've invested significantly. I think we've brought on 40 plus headcounts over the last year since the acquisition, which really enables us to invest really heavily in R&D and innovation, making sure that we're removing the friction out of buying hunting and fishing licenses, because just like going to a DMV and having that experience is difficult. You have to renew your driver's license. You have to have a current vehicle registration. On the hunting and fishing side, you don't have to do that. And a lot of people, if that friction is so great, they'll just go off and do other activities. And so we want to remove that friction, make it effortless for people to get hunting and fishing licenses. And really, our mission on the outdoor side has always been to make it easier for folks to spend a day outside. And so that's what we're all about.
Well, we spend a lot of time with recruitment of customers talking about barriers to recruitment, and certainly the license buying process and the complexity that entails sometimes can be a definite barrier. There's no doubt. And we all remember when you'd buy a license where it was handwritten on a sticky stamp. They'd stick it on your card, and you might lose it or whatever. There was no electronic version of that. So certainly streamlining and creating more efficiencies in a government process, y'all are doing the Lord's work. All I can think about taking the number is the movie Beetlejuice, where the guy gets his number and it's 9,999,999. That's what I feel like when I go to the DMV. So.
Well, and you talk about the transition that state fish and wildlife agencies have made. When I started with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife 20 plus years ago, our director at the time was an old school game warden. That's where he came up through the ranks, and his attitude was, if people want to hunt or fish in Oregon, they can damn well come to us and buy a license. And he didn't care about marketing. He didn't want to hear about it. He didn't care how easy or hard it was. Like, our job was to manage wildlife, and if people wanted to go out there and hunt and fish, then they would navigate whatever we put out in their way. And as we saw, as we're coming through the 1990s and into the 2000s, that just didn't cut it in terms of the conservation funding base.
Well, I'm so glad to see this technology come into the fishing and hunting space, and you're one of the reasons why it's happening, because we're a little bit behind, some other spaces out there, but it is so much easier to fish and hunt not only in state but out of state especially, and I think that's helped increase the amount of anglers and hunters out there, because it is a lot easier to purchase your license online instead of getting to a state and then trying to find a spot that's open that's got the license, and wasting time that way, where you can just do it all before you go, and it's nice and easy and ready for you there. So I appreciate you guys doing what you're doing. But so we're here at ICAST, the world's largest fishing show for business side, and we've got all these exhibitors here and some state agencies. So are you working with some of the folks here at ICAST as well, or?
We are here to look for unique partnership opportunities for our clients. And so one of the unique things that PayIt Outdoors brings to the market is we've got these really rich relationships with people throughout the industry. A lot of us at PayIt Outdoors have worked for Fish and Wildlife agencies. I've got 25 years in. Samantha Petter's got 10 or 15 years in state government. So we understand that side of it. But we've also worked really closely with industry and NGOs to form these partnerships that state fish and wildlife agencies really rely on to get out there and engage more people. And so I feel pretty strongly that one of the values that we can bring to our clients is those relationships and looking for those types of partnerships that could really be win-win-wins for the end users, for the agencies, and then with the partners here at ICAST that we're working on. And so we're working on a couple of really neat kind of innovative concepts. That's why we're here specifically. Not ready to talk about that today, but hopefully you'll hear about it from me.
That's always drove me crazy, is we NGOs, state wildlife agencies, federal wildlife agencies, industry manufacturers, retailers, rangers, the media, we all have a lot of common goals, but barely are we working together. So great to hear what you're doing, Chris, and I look forward to it.
There's been a lot of barriers to that, Jim, and you've probably witnessed this with your work throughout your career, is fish and wildlife agencies like to historically silo themselves. It's like, oh, why would we work with this organization or this retailer? Well, I'll tell you why, because their customers are your customers, and what's good for their business is what's good for the conservation funding base, right? And so that's been a real challenge throughout my career, is to start breaking down those barriers and help fish and wildlife agencies understand that it's okay. And, there's state rules you have to navigate. States notoriously dislike exclusive arrangements, but that's where you come and you say, hey, here's the playing field. And if you want to play in this playing field, bring it on and contribute to this effort. And that's where states can start to play, because they're being inclusive rather than exclusive. But these partnerships, it takes somebody who has the vision to kind of see what might be possible, and then a little bit of the grit and tenacity to see it through.
Well, I don't want to overgeneralize, but, I spent half a career is working for a state agency, state fish and wildlife agency, and I always told folks, they're sort of the anomaly in government, because they operate more like a business. Most of them don't get general tax dollars. They don't depend on license dollars. They depend on customers that don't have to participate if they choose not to your point earlier. And if you don't use a lot of business models and business techniques that the rest of the world uses, you're going to be losing ground. And what the exact thing you're talking about streamlining processes and making things more usable, user friendly. The rest of the business world has done that for decades, or they're not successful. They go out of business. And it doesn't make sense to silo your business into we're going to do everything internally, when there's a piece of your business that someone can do much cheaper, much more efficiently, and much more effectively. You just move that part over there and let them handle that. And it's turning an aircraft carrier. You can't, government doesn't turn on a dime, but I think we're seeing that shift to recognizing that there are special groups that specialize in certain aspects. And as long as we can capitalize on that in a way that complies with state government requirements, it makes no sense not to do that.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I started really early in my career, is nothing that we're doing in the R3 realm, marketing these opportunities, engaging people, it's not new. It's not rocket science. And there happens to be about 500 Fortune 500 companies out there who have really demonstrated exactly how to do this stuff. What's unique for us is our audience and the processes that people who want to enjoy the outdoors have to go through to get out in the field, get out on the water to enjoy them. But if you can learn from a Toyota, from an Intel, from a Microsoft, you name it, any of these innovative companies that are really great at engaging audiences, use that, put it through the lens of your audience and what they have to go through to get outside, like, you can do a lot of great things. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Well,
and to your point earlier about, a very back in the past leader of an agency that if they want to do it, they'll come to us. It's very short-sighted these days. Back then, maybe it worked. If you want to do it, we're the only game in town. You got to come to us. Now, people who we're trying to recruit into hunting, angling, boating, and shooting, they have ball they play. They have football, baseball, basketball, soccer. They have travel teams. We're competing against all these other outdoor recreation activities for customer base. Yeah.
And their motivations are different, right? Like so much has changed. And Jim, you probably know this better than all of us because you've been so immersed in the research into this. But motivations, barriers, all of this stuff has changed so much from what brought me into hunting and fishing, that if you don't take a step back and force yourself to kind of have empathy for these new participants, you might think that what resonates with me and what motivated me is the same for this audience or that audience, and it's just not true.
No, the research, it's eye-opening and it's frustrating at the same time because the research shows we've got 10 million people on the fence ready to get in the field. And all we have to do is communicate with them as an industry, whether that's the manufacturers or the state wildlife agencies, and I think they're just thinking the other one is doing it. So that's kind of why John, we should start a podcast and talk about this type of stuff. And Connecting with Conservation is actually an existing program through Outdoor Stewards where we've developed short series of videos where in each video, we have one state agency person and one manufacturer, and both of them say, when you buy a fishing license, you're supporting conservation. When you buy a fishing rod, you're supporting conservation. So we're getting them on the same page, but we've been doing this for quite some time. But I think over the last 5 years, and you've seen this too, right? State agencies have gone from having a wildlife biologist to try to write a newsletter to now actually bringing in marketing people.
Yeah, and real professionals, right? It's actually a real discipline. It's like I remember in Oregon, our first social media coordinator, you have a Facebook account? Mm-hmm. You're it. And it's like, no. It's a real discipline. People actually go to school for this stuff.
It would terrify an agency if we said we're going to use an outdoor rider to run a fish hatchery.
Right, yeah.
But yet we'll use a fish biologist to be the outdoor rider.
Yeah, or let's do our herd comp this year with this guy over here who sorts the mail, whatever.
Well, one of the things that excites me about modernizing our licensing system, our ability to get licenses to customers is the data we can collect there, because the rest of the especially the retail world has done that for decades. And I remember way back somebody told me a story about LL Bean, that they have such a database on their customers that they actually tailor their catalogs based on the interest and desires of particular target groups. So, if I'd like particular colors, but I live in the Southeast, I'm going to see those colors in the catalog, but I'm probably not going to see heavy wool stuff because, the average temperature is 85 degrees. I don't need that. And agencies haven't done that. But now with the data that's coming in, we probably don't have it to that granularity, but we certainly know a lot more about our customers with electronic data than we did with the old paper system.
And we're starting to have the tools that enable us to do exactly what you're talking about. When I started out my career, as we've talked about, as a wildlife biologist, eventually I learned that the agency paid people to teach other people how to hunt and fish, and it's like, that's my racket. So I went back and got a marketing degree and got into the information education, outreach, customer engagement type section of our agency. I never, ever envisioned that I would ever leave the agency. I'm conservation mission driven to the core, and I just loved my job. But I was frustrated because we were doing all this great work, but we couldn't get it in the hands of the people who needed it at the time they needed it because we didn't have the technology. And we went down a couple of paths trying to get a CRM in place in Oregon, and we failed miserably, just wasted a tremendous amount of money and ended up never, ever being able to capitalize on that investment. And so I started to think, we need this tool in conservation, and it's going to take a private vendor to do this. And about the same time I was thinking about that, S3 started recruiting me because they saw that states needed this technology and they wanted to build it the right way, and they knew that I was involved in this stuff. And so it took them a while to get me across the fence. They finally did. And it took us about 3 years of research and development to get our CRM out there, but it's a thing of beauty. And we can send people engagement emails and other touch points specific to what their interests are, specific to their demographics. And like an email or a text that I get is going to have to be look way different than somebody as old as Gassett.
Wow.
or a young female millennial. We just know that we're all different and we have different motivations, and we can get so detailed as to just ask a real quick question in an email. Say, hey, we noticed you didn't fish this year. Like, why didn't you? And we'll give them the main barriers based off of the research. And when they pick one, it's written on their profile. And so the next email that they get, that person's going to get something. If they chose like access as the barrier, they're going to get something that, helps them find locations to fish. And if my barrier was something else, you would get served up something else. And it's all automated in the system based off of the technology.
And that's going to be a major benefit to improve those industry agency relations, because your Smith & Wessons, your Mossbergs, and your Sig Sauers, they know their customers, right? And if you didn't know your customer as a state agency, there wasn't a connection there. But having that now, where PayIt, you're working with several state agencies, and you're out here now, you're making the industry connections, and you can offer now, hey, we know our customers, we know which ones like to fly fish, which ones like to, saltwater fish, and that's going to be gold to the folks walking, when you're walking around here. So I definitely envision seeing more partnerships between industry and agency, which is, you're going to, that's when the floodgates are going to open, and we're really going to do better at communicating and recruiting that next generation, and really retaining the folks we have, maybe even reactivating a few. And I know that scares some people out there. They're going to flood the market with, too many hunters or anglers. They're never going to be, but that's not the case. State wildlife agencies don't want that. They just want a nice sustained 1.5% growth. We're not going to double the amount of hunters or anglers or anything like that out there. Just never going to happen. But it's good to see that you're doing what you're doing. You were the first one, because I was with NSSF starting in 2009, and I was like, ooh, no, we don't know anything about who owns guns or why they own them or what they do with them. But you were the first one that said, from a state agency, saying we've got to learn about the gender, the age, the interests, and what they're doing, and not just we have 1 million hunters in Oregon. So kudos to you. And 15 years later, it's paying dividends, right? So
starting to, it's getting pretty, it's getting pretty sophisticated. I remember, boy, it was at a meeting in Las Vegas, and I don't know if you were there, Gassett. I don't know if you were either, but it was the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies R3 workshop that we used to have every winter, and this was before before the R3 symposium, and so it was really the R3 event each year for practitioners, and we grew it up to over 100 participants. But one of the topics was, how do you measure R3 success? And at the time, it's like, oh, did kids have a good time? Oh, yeah. Do volunteers like it? Oh, yeah. We're doing great work. We're doing God's work. And that's the unique thing about R3, is that you could ask me 100 different ideas. Well, would that be a bad thing? No, it wouldn't be a bad thing, except for the opportunity cost. And so, yes, people would have fun with this. Maybe your agency would get some good positive PR with this, but if we're in the business of protecting conservation, we need to make sure that our efforts are effective, that they scale. And to do that, you need to measure specific things. You need to have data about specific audiences to really baseline where you are and be able to evaluate what you're doing.
Well, one of the things that excites me about the private sector, not the least of which I'm a capitalist at heart. I like the private sector, is that And I got a bit of advice. I promoted at a fairly young age to run an agency, and I went to lunch with my old crusty law enforcement colonel one day, and I asked him, I said, Colonel Gray, I said, what if I screw it up? And he said, well, guess it. He goes, how many state fish and wildlife agencies are there? I said, well, there's 50. And he goes, well, none of them have ever gone out of business. None of them, you might screw it up, but they're not going anywhere. And that's true. It's a government agency. It's always going to be there. They're always, whether they do it right or wrong, they're going to be there. On the private sector, you either do it right or you go out of business. So, with a company like PayIt, you're either the best you can be and you're getting it done and you're a benefit for your customers, being the agencies, or they're not going to hire you. So you're compelled to do it the right way. And when Gray told me that, I was like, I'm not sure what he meant, but 2 decades later, I'm like, I know exactly what he meant now.
Yeah, and it's weird because there's the pressure on a licensing vendor is intense. Because when you think of a state fish and wildlife agency, and we talked about them being kind of a quasi business because they're self-funded largely, they have one source of collecting that revenue. It's through their licensing system. And one thing that we know about technology, it's flawed. Like, there's no such thing as perfect technology. You're going to have bugs. You're going to have different issues. And so being able to consistently be on and making sure the system works, like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves and take a great deal of pride in offering that service and taking it really seriously. And we do have times when things go wrong, but boy, our team rallies hard.
Well, and that says a lot about a company is that, I had the argument with my staff about, auto renew for credit cards. Like, we don't want to hold credit card information. We might get hacked. I'm like, the Pentagon gets hacked. American Express gets hacked. AT&T just got every customer AT&T's ever had, of which I'm one, got hacked. That's not a reason not to do something. You put the protections in place and you be responsive when you have a failure. And that tells more about what your business model is than anything else, I think.
Yeah, so. I mean, it's all about partnership, right? Like a lot of, like in the past, like in my experience in Oregon, we had a licensing vendor. We managed that relationship through the contract. And, here's what the contract says. And it's like, yeah, the contract is the baseline, but out front is the relationship with the people. And knowing that our interests are aligned with yours. Like I said, at heart, I'm a conservationist, and I understand that what the agencies are trying to do. And if we're furthering conservation, if we are making it easier for people to access the outdoors, and we're meeting the business needs of an agency, like that's what I want our relationship focused on. Because if we're doing that, we're continuously propelling the conservation industry forward rather than kind of holding us back and lowering the bar to whatever the contract says. Like I always, like my best partners in this business are those agencies who are willing to lean in and take chances and try new things.
Well, and speaking of that, electronic licensing means, electronic data, and that means real-time understanding of trends. So, data dashboards, if I was running an agency, that would be one of my top priorities. Is I don't want to know a year from now what happened to my fishing license sales last spring. I want to know within a week or two what's happening to my fishing license sales. And and there's folks that like that idea and don't like that idea, but I really like the idea of having real-time trend data on your licensing, because you can be a hell of a lot more responsive right now than you can a year from now.
Yeah, you can actually be more responsive than what an agency's ready to be, right? You mentioned the first ones that we did out of the Western, out in Oregon. The very first data dashboard, I partnered with Rob Southwick to bring that concept into reality. And at the time, we started out with an annual dashboard, and then we went to quarterly. And like when we went to quarterly, like we were the envy of the country. It's like, you guys get this. Like you remember even from your days in Kentucky is like if you wanted to understand your license sales, you would hire a Duda or Southwick, and they would download your license database, your sales database, and then 9 months later, you'd get a 750-page report, and it would all be based off of historical information. And now we have real-time data dashboards. And what that does for state agencies is, if they are attuned to it and sophisticated enough to be watching those, they might see like participation in one of their key opportunities kind of trickling down in real time, which means okay, this is down. What can we do right now to try to turn the tides on that? And I think that's where state agencies need to build that muscle, is to be more proactive than waiting until the end of a license year and say, oh, license years are down. What could we do next year?
All right, well, I think we covered a lot of the good stuff there, and, well, maybe not the good stuff, but the better stuff is to come, right? We're at ICAST here. Did you see anything you like? You bringing anything home? You got plans to get out in the field or on the water?
I made a critical error. I brought my small carry-on bag, like rookie mistake.
Yep.
And yes, I saw everything that I liked.
Gotcha. I know you got dog days of summer wrapping up here. You got some fall plans,
Yeah, I'm going to do, I got a pup at home. This will be his second season, so hope to do a lot of upland hunting with him. And not much better. Yeah, and fishing and hunting and like every opportunity I get.
Well, tell us a little bit about where we can learn more about your services, your website or social media and whatnot, and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, payitgov.com is our website, and you can click on the outdoors product there, PayIt Outdoors, and learn all about us. Reach out to me directly anytime for information. I'd love to talk this stuff.
Awesome.
All right, well
Chris,
keep it up.
Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure. It's always enlightening to talk to you. You're one of the smartest people I know, so I like talking to people.
Go on, I'm listening.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for being here. Certainly want to do this again sometime.
All right, you got it, fellas.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.